Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Renee Hyatt. Welcome to Tutorial Tuesday. This is week 8, and today we're going to talk about putting together an on-point quilt. So, I'm using Bloom as an example. However, the tips that I give you today will help you pretty much with putting any quilt together, but especially putting together the center of an on-point quilt. So, last week we talked about cutting our setting triangles, both the ones that will end up along your runs, as well as your corners that go into each of the 4 corners. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to lay out your quilt. So following the diagrams in your booklet, you will lay out your quilt. Now, if you did similar to myself, and in that you used basically 4 colors, 2 of each colorway, you're going to need to be a little careful in laying it out. So you can only go so far is what I tell people in a quilt top. So especially being that I have 4 colors and it's only a 4x4, I'm going to have colors that are going to touch each other. Now, at first this might bother you, but believe me, nobody is going to look at this with as keen of an eye as you are. So at first it did bother me that I had my 2 yellows next to each other and 2 oranges next to each other here, 2 blues here. But let's be realistic, I only have 4 colors, so they can only go so far. What I looked at more was the distribution of the fabrics. So for instance, the purple I have on the left-hand side of the quilt and in the top quadrant. The darker purple, same purple, I have in the lower corner on the right side. So ones that are definitely going to jump out, such as the deeper purple and the deeper blue, because they are a smidge darker, same with the orange. Again, you're basically 4 colors. I want to make sure that in this corner I only have 1 of each, and in this corner I only have 1 of each of the other colors. And then the same here, these are in the opposite and these are in the opposite. So there really is an exact science on this. It's basically an art. You have to be happy with it, but you will basically set your quilt out, take a picture of it. I let this sit overnight, and I'm good with it. So what I started to do is I started to construct it working my way off of the right hand corner. Some of you might work your way off the left hand corner. I probably go right because I'm left-handed and right-minded. So it doesn't matter, but you're basically going to put together your rows. So you can see here, when I put my side triangles on, I lined it up with the bottom of the block. So the bottom being the distance from the corner. And so those are lined up flush. These are oversized, and I will need to cut these straight off. I have to create a straight edge here, if you would. And so I will have to cut these off when I go to put my rows together. But for the meantime, I just leave them there. And a lot of folks start off by putting their corner unit on. I do not. My corners are the very last thing to go on. So I will continue putting these together into rows, and then I will put my rows together. I'm going to give you some demonstration of that, and then I will put on my 4 corners. This quilt center will need to be trimmed due to the oversized setting triangles. We're going to cover that next week. I just thought it was a lot to put in 1 week, and there's a lot of tips just on borders alone. So in week 9, we will actually talk about trimming down the center of our quilt and then how to put on the borders, especially knowing that our outer border is going to be a pieced border. Okay? So let me show you how I go about putting one of these rows together, and then I'm going to walk you through putting 2 rows together and then pressing those, which will be wanting that 32-inch stick, seam stick, if you haven't bought it already, because every one of these seams goes open. We're going to press open between our blocks, and we're going to press open between our rows. This actually comes together quite nice. We don't have two points coming together, and there's no piecing in these corners. So believe it or not, while it was a little tricky in putting the blocks together, you're going to find that the blocks go together really nicely. You're still going to want to pin, and I'm going to show you that. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, so now we're going to talk about putting these together. So this first unit that I'm putting together, it's coming off of my lower right corner. And so I have the large half square triangle. And what I'm going to do is this side goes up against the corner unit. So I'm lining up my half square, or my quarter square triangle, I should say, up in the upper right corner here to sew. Now I've pinned it. Probably some folks think this is probably a little over pinning, being that I'm matching this block to a quarter square triangle, the setting triangle. But I've pressed these seams open, and I want to take care with them to make sure that they don't come apart. I lowered my stitch length when I put them together, so that's going to help me. But I still want to be mindful that they need to be handled with care. Alright, so I'm going to start sewing this together. This probably isn't crucial for you to pay attention to, but you still want to be very, very mindful of your 1/4 inch seam. When your center is completely put together, your 1/4 inch seam is going to be a factor in that if you do a scant 1/4 inch some places and a 1/4 inch some places and a wide 1/4 inch another place, then your quilt is not going to match up and you will have trouble bringing your rows together, as well as your center won't be squared when you get done. So still very, very important for a 1/4 inch seam here. All right, so I have my hover foot on. Sorry, my presser foot has gone a little wonky here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start our stitching. And I'm stitching with the pieced block on top, and I'm watching for where my seams cross in those squares. I'm coming down. Again, left-hand pinning is really going to be helpful here in that you are able to either just pull them back or you can take them completely out. So 1/4 inch seam is going to bring those V-stars to the proper place. I'm going to come on through, take out my pins as I go. All the way through. And I'm going to go right through this remaining corner. It's going to get cut off, so it allows me to go ahead and do my chain piecing, so there's no reason not to go through it. All right, in this case, I'm bringing two of my blocks together, my 5 diamond with my V-star. So here, I'm definitely going to take care to match my seams, my pressed open seams, because there's no nesting. So I go ahead and do the double pin like you've seen me do before. And I also pin here because even though it's matching to a background square, it still tends to sometimes get pushed out on some folks' machine. I don't really have it on my FOF because it has the dual technology. I think some Berninas have it as well. I think Husqvarna has recently introduced it. So that will help you keep it. But some of the older models, they tend to push it out when there's a lot of bulk. Remember, we trimmed pretty good, but when we trimmed our 4 corners there, when we put it together, our dog ears. But if you find that your machine is pushing this out, the pressure on your foot, your presser foot, the pressure on your presser foot might be too high. So that's something that you can have serviced and changed, or you can actually look it up on the internet. There's probably a knob somewhere on your machine to release it. Just be very careful. Slight bring it down slightly. Don't take a big chunk, like 1 or 2 notches at a time. All right, so again, hover engaged, and I'm going to come on through. I'm going to remove my pins as I go. And I did the same here. There's a half square triangle, or a square and a square below this. So I'm going to make sure that I've gone ahead and made sure that that doesn't slip. All right. And I'm going to keep going through. Apologize, it's hard for you to see everything as I'm going here. And you want to keep it to the 1/4 inch all the way through. All right, so now we're going to do some pressing. Okay, so let's talk about pressing. So I have my 32 out here just because I know I'm going to be using it for my rows. So when we're putting together our 1/4 square triangles with our blocks, there is no reason to press that seam open. We're just going to go ahead and give it a nice setting seam, a finger press, a press, all right, and then just get it a little hit with best press and press it to make sure that it's nice and open. Again, the wool mat is going to give you a nice press from both sides, and it's going to come out really nicely. All right, so for our blocks, here's where we're going to set our seam, and then we're going to come over our big stick, and you're going to press these open. And this again is when the big stick really comes into play, because all of these seams that you've pressed open now are below the stick, and they are not being interfered with as I come through. I can give this a nice amount of steam, give it a little rock. That will actually bring the seams flatter. People talk about bulky seams and such. Pressing properly is pretty much the key to going ahead and pressing your seams here. All right, and I probably will give it a little hit of steam as well, making sure that it's nice and flat. All right, so let's go back and sew some more. Now on to rows. Okay, so now we're ready to put our rows together. So you can see here what I did is the side, when I go to put my rows together, I'm always going to have a row that's going to match up, or a block that's going to match up with the 1/4 square triangle, the setting triangle. So I want to put that on the bottom. I know it seems backwards to some of you, as it you would expect probably the bigger piece to be on the bottom, but it's really not, it doesn't really make sense. We have piecing here that we're going to want to be mindful of, corners that we're going to want to keep track of that we're hitting, so it makes sense to put the row with the most blocks on top. You can see that I cleaned off the corners there, the overhangs. I just took a straight edge ruler and trimmed them to match the height of my blocks. All right, now you will notice that, and I meant to say this when I was sewing the blocks together earlier, is that I'm using my long pins again. I love these. In fact, I pretty much just use them. 2 reasons. One, again, the length keeps me, when I'm pulling them out as it gets close to the needle, it allows me to keep my hand further back. 2, they also allow me to grab a pretty good chunk of fabric in the pin so that I don't have this bulk pinch. I also pin, you'll notice, further back. So basically my needle is the only thing up in the 1/4 inch, or my pin tops. And I'm not going to run them over. Again, remember, your machine can do it, but you can ruin the timing of your machine. So it's not about breaking a needle, it's not about breaking a pin or bending a pin, it's about ruining the timing in your machine. So don't run over pins. So I will be able to pull these back and be able to sew on through, or you could go ahead and pull them out as you go, which is what I typically do, being that I'm left-handed. So left-handed pinning makes sense. Long pins help a lot, and that you don't have a lot of bulk in your seams. The next thing is that as you sew this quilt, it will become really heavy, especially as you put your rows together, and we're going to talk about how I approach that in a second. But you will, as your quilt gets longer and longer, it's good to go ahead and roll it so that it is sitting in your lap as you sew, so that you're supporting it. All right? So we're going to go ahead and get started here. My presser foot, it just keeps, or my foot pedal keeps taking a walk. All right, so I'm going to go ahead through. You're going to put down your best 1/4 inch again to keep your quilt coming together nicely. I pinned all the double interchanges. If your machine has a tendency to push these, you'll want to pin those as well, as we talked about when we were putting our blocks together. So I just come right up on it. I go ahead and pull out my pins. Or if you're right-handed, you can just pull them back with your thumb and get them after you're done going through. But this allows me to get nice and close before I have to pull them out. Again, I'm being mindful that this is not moving, that its edges are staying together. And while we don't have points coming together, we do have all our seam exchanges coming together where we pressed open. So that's why it's really, really important to pin. Sorry to bore you with the sewing, but I think for some, this is helpful. Ooh, look at me just running over needles, talking to you all, not paying attention. So don't do that. Yeah, so I think watching, not me run over pins, is something that could be helpful to some. So I apologize for those of you who are bored with the sewing. We're almost there. I didn't pick a long row to do. Now let me concentrate so I remove my pins on time, since I'm such a nut job about not running over pins. Poor Leona, running over a pin. All right. Yes, I name my machines for those who don't follow me on Facebook. They all should have a name. All right. And so we come to the end here, and I'm going to come all the way through. So I'm going to take you over to press this now, and this is when you're going to want that big stick. All right. So we're going to set our seam. Sorry, I can only get my camera angle so wide, but you basically get the idea here. And I'm going to go ahead and press that before I put it over the stick. And this is our smallest seam putting together our rows. So you can see that the stick allows me to get this completely on one stick as opposed to moving the sticks. But I will need to move it once I get to a bigger row. But I may only need to move it once or twice. Alright, so I set my seam, put it over the stick, and now I'm going to come through, finger pressing it in front of the iron. Again, just be careful if you're using steam. I usually listen to mine, and I have a pretty good sense. Oop, I'm getting hung up on my cabinet door here. I have a pretty good sense when it's going to go, so I know to move. You just listen, like anything, right? You listen to it, and you'll know when it's about to happen. All right, so I went through one pass. It did not steam, so now I'm going to push the steam and make sure it is getting a steam. The wooden stick will wick the steam through unlike those padded sticks. And it will dry it immediately, so you don't need to worry that it's really wet and such. All right, so now I turn it forward. I can move my stick back here, and now you see here, give it a little hit with best press, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew it together, or press it nice and flat. All right, so you can see here how outside of our block we're getting this big extra, and that's what we're going, big extra seam here, or fabric. So we're going to talk about trimming these down next week, so that you're a 1/4 inch off of these point to points, but we're going to talk about that next week. All right, so let's regroup at the quilt. All right, everyone, so we're back at the quilt, my design wall, and I've laid back my 2-pieced rows, and I do this. So I know a lot of people just can automatically add a row and they're good to go with pinning it and sewing it, and then they put it back up on the wall. But I've seen so many people put their rows on backwards, and with these half square triangles it matters, so, or 1/4 square triangles, setting triangles, it matters. So I am pretty, let's say it, anal, about making sure that I see it, flip it, pin it, sew it. So I do the same when I'm putting my quilt center together. I will go ahead and put this up on the wall, and then I will flip this over, pin it, sew it, put it back on the wall. Remember, you're going to cut off your setting triangles, the little tops there that stick out. When you go to put your rows together, you're going to make sure that you're taking care in pinning, because you have a lot of open seams. Now, this quilt's going to get really heavy really fast, and you have these open seams, so remember, you're going to want to fold it and roll it so it's sitting in your lap as you sew. And because of that, I go ahead and only put half my quilt together, half my quilt together, and then only once have all of that coming together, versus having 5 rows on my lap and adding a small 6th row, okay? So what I do is I sew 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and then I probably in this case will go 3 to 4, and then I would stop. And then I would go ahead and sew rows 6 to 5, 5 to 4, and then I'm attaching 4 to 3 once, just for that one seam, having it all on my lap. All right? You will have extra fabric up top here past the 1/4 inch. That is perfectly fine. That is as designed. We are going to talk about how to trim that down best next week. We are also then going to talk about putting on your inner border and then your pieced piano keys. So make sure you're putting those piano keys together so you're ready to go once you get your center together. And that is, I believe, step 62. Let's double check my memory. Yes, page 24, step 62. You're going to go ahead and follow the instructions there for putting together your piano keys. Now, it is really, really going to matter. When I elected to do this quilt, with different size blocks and a piece border, I thought my testers and myself were going to shoot ourselves. The math is extremely tricky, but we have it worked out. So, but it is going to depend on you using a 1/4 inch when you put those piano keys together. So please make sure you double check it and you are doing a true 1/4 inch on the piano keys. It will matter, all right? So make sure you're updating your quilt project sheet if you have them. It's exciting to check off a few more boxes and to add a few more dates. Sometimes I like to put dates. Sometimes that might be depression to put dates and seeing how long it actually took me to get around to finishing something. But that's why I like the project quilt sheets. They keep me honest. All right. So good luck. Have fun with it. Take your time. You know, it's enjoy the journey. So I will see you here next week to talk borders. Have a great week, guys. Take care.